Live streaming is on.
Oh, that's quite loud. So you wanted to talk to me about an interface that we missed?
Yeah. So in the model, like it seems to me, I'm trying to keep myself like away from the details of the code inside um, the current schema directory, just so that I can kind of make the right thing for any old generic model that you'd want, like. But it kind of seems to me, thinking through it a little bit, that like um, it's not always putting things into IPFS and pulling things out of IPFS. It's also like usually pulling things out of IPFS, making a bunch of new things, and then stuffing the new things into IPFS, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're not. It's not completely unrelated. The putting in and the taking out. They're usually derivations.
right. But it's that making new things is the interface I didn't really think about that much. Sorry, I'm just unlocking some GitHub with my two-factor auth. Oops. So I got to thinking about it a little bit, just how to handle it properly. And I think like when you know, it looks like in the code that you have there that you have like a static create method, something like that, on all the model classes that you basically just calls new under the hood for that class.
Yeah. But that is merely just a convention of mine that I prefer.
Yeah, and
And
I like it more too. Like just new kind of looks gross in the code to me, but
I don't like new things. I mean,
yeah. Right. Now, like, what I'm kind of wondering is, um, can you short circuit, like, do because obviously the way, if you do create like that, what you're doing is you kind of need to go from the root out to the leaves and like creating the objects like in each kind of successive level of the tree, right?
um,
Um,
yes, that's right. Yep.
and like it's always bespoke code that's doing that. What I got to thinking is like if I just passed in an object that had the right shape for the nested elements when I
Mm.
knew the thing, and then just did that all under the hood, like made sure that all the
Yeah,
models
so
lined up
that's
properly.
as a top level method on IPLD struct.
Mhm.
That is the static clone method where you can pass in an object that has the right shape
Yeah,
and it will convert them into all of the classes all the way down the tree.
right. But where I'm so the only IPLD stuff that I have currently written into the system is well, I guess most of it is in the model class. Um, but the thing is, the model class is going to have like a derived instance that like doesn't necessarily have any sort of idea of all the other model classes around, basically.
It shouldn't, yeah, it should be unaware of it, but you're saying how does the model class make its children be instances of developer created classes?
Yes.
Okay, so the model class should have some. It should, when you call iPorm.open,
Yeah.
you supply the classes object.
Right.
You should be able to hook that inside the model instance.
But that kind of begs the question of, am I using an IPORM method to actually instance stuff?
Yep,
Yeah.
line you up. Yeah, because you can, otherwise you got to inject the classes somehow.
Yeah. The only thing that has enough context to know what classes you would use to create the children is IPORM, right?
Yeah, because it needs to have parsed that IPLD schema string to know how to even figure out what the names of the classes are in the first place. So you're already in IPORM land a bit, and then I mean, is there why would you want to instance one of these classes without having loaded IPORM first?
Right. No, so that's kind of broadly the question that I have about the consuming code and all this is like, do I have this IPORM singleton that I'm like, that's the only thing I'm mainly interacting with when I'm trying to modify things that I pulled out of IPFS? Or like how much work is actually going on inside the models?
How much work is going on inside the models? So there should be an unlimited amount of work inside the models that was user supplied.
Yeah.
Were you asking how much work goes on in the conversion between IPFS and not?
Let me.
I think I see what you mean. You mean like because we built these classes having extended model.
Right.
How would it know what the other? How would it interpret the string provided? How would it interpret the schema string to know how to map that to classes? Right.
Right.
Okay. I think that there's two ways you could solve that.
Yeah.
You could provide a static method on the model class that allowed you to set the class map that just mapped string names that would be derived from all of the IPLB schema strings and map that to some class instances. If you wanted to manually override it, perhaps you want to be in testing or something like that. But additionally, when you call IPORM.open, I would expect that relative to when I call IPORM.uncrush or crush,
yeah,
if I called a class from there, it should use the classes that I provided to create that instance of IPORM, which means that I should be able to have multiple ones running in the same context, so it's not actually global.
So you don't want it to be a global singleton, and that's fine. That's kind of what I came to you.
I mostly because I hate global single. I've never ever had a good experience. I've never ever found a reason for a global singleton to survive.
Right.
Global is just another. There's always other methods of having a higher wrapping context.
Yeah.
And especially since we're working in the realm of clients and servers and peers, so often do you need to have like testing that's got multiple contexts, and so global actually becomes a big enemy. I've found when trying to simulate the client and the server or a peer and a peer, and you're like, oh, but that's global shit, and then you need to like box it, and then it just sucks.
Yeah. Okay. So that's fair. So like when I talk about the consuming code, what I'm talking about is basically interblock or interpulse, right? Interpulse like is going to be pulling stuff off of the wire, like modifying it and then pushing the updates back onto the wire, right?
Where the wire represents possibly storage, possibly transmission. Basically, the wire represents IPFS.
Yeah.
Yes, the interpulse engine, one of its primary functions is the translation between IPFS land and our land, class land.
So what I'm kind of what I'm thinking here is basically interpulse is only picking up IPORM and like reading and writing to it and like tapping the classes that come out of it, but it's never instancing the models directly.
That's a very good question.
Because if it instances the models directly, then that's when you run into the problem of like nothing has the right amount of context to properly build.
I think that so long as you can access the classes, the engine itself actually only ever needs to touch those classes via the pulse. So there's like one class that then has all the classes.
Right.
So You are asking me if whenever the engine wants to interact with these classes, does it have an IPORM instance around?
Basically, yeah. I mean that's like that's the design question to me. It's just like I can add the functionality into the model, and then it would be a much more manual process of like basically dumpster diving through the models and instancing things, and then like tapping the methods after you've instanced them. But it just feels way cleaner to me to be like, okay, like I want like I'm going to give you this big nested object, and you're going to give me back the hydrated version of it, and like and and so my job is basically just coming up with the data that fits the parameters there, and then asking IPORM to like, hydrate that into a real object that I can start poking around at. And then eventually when I poke at it, I'll be like push it back on the wire. Right. But there's someone in the system that's like, whether it's like through an agent or something like that, it's someone in the system is calling new on these models, like at various levels.
I think that the only actor who can have that responsibility is an IPORM instance.
Okay.
Which there may be many.
Okay.
And I think that if you want to, for example, if I want to access the RX class, what I should do is make an IPORM instance. Perhaps there's one that can be made for testing purposes, like a IPORM mock.
Yeah.
And then I would treat that like the container from which I pull all my classes, and they're not straight up ES6 imports. They've already been imported and then modified with some hooks that give it hooks into the IPORM context that surround them.
Yeah.
I think that's I believe, just trying to think about it, which is never a great way, but it seems like that's enough for all of the cases where I've had to use these classes so far. Is that because the reason why I'm confident in that is I a while ago adopted a policy of creating an index file within the root of all of the classes that re-exports all of the imports from inside it, which means that that's equivalent to a class container. And so every time that I consume those classes, I am actually importing from that index.js import map. So therefore, it sort of feels like having an IPORM object that acted the same wouldn't really change my code much.
Right. It's just like it's the factory for all the objects, basically. Then, which is sort of what your index file is most of the time, anyway.
Yeah. So IPORM would act like an index. It'd act like a class factory, and then I'd instance those classes in my code, or rehydrate them from the IPORM instance that bore them.
Yeah, and I think what you'll find is like, so there's a benefit and there's a drawback, right? If there's a drawback is that you can't write instancing code inside of methods on models, like on derivatives.
Slow down. Say that again.
Okay, so like if you were inside of a method on like a model derivative, so like one of the levels of the data tree. If you tried to do like a new operation or whatever the equivalent of a new operation is inside that method of another model, like I guess you could import that model statically and do that. But if you're trying to push everything so that it's always going through IPORM, like I think you'll probably kind of lose track of coherency in the IPORM level a bit.
You'd start to leak out the sides of the shroud.
So that's a drawback. Like that means you basically would always need to talk to IPORM to create new stuff. But I think the benefit there is that I could give IPORM data objects that had multiple nested levels.
No, hang on. I should have access to the IPORM instance within the class that I am as a static. I should be able to call that as a static method.
Right.
Like, so whenever I'm deeply in the tree and I'm in a method, I should be able to call the ultimate parent with the static method and get the IPORM instance to be able to give me the class. And I should be able to go like super dot class name dot create, or even new, if that's how I've been using my classes. Like this ORM shouldn't tell me that I have to use new or create or whatever. It's just give me the class instance and handle it when I tell you to crush it, inflate it when I tell you to uncrush.
Okay.
Does that solve that problem?
No, I'm getting confused. I'm probably like not at a point yet where I can concretely solve any of these anyway. I'm just trying to keep ahead of it a little bit. But
I think that's a really good oversight that we hadn't touched on before, because the way I built the prototype was I actually had the instances of the class and I passed those directly as the class map. But here we only have the IPLD schema string that we're trying to interpret, which gives us no reference to the imported class.
Well, you just need the person who, you need the thing that has the context there. Why do I always think of code as people? I don't know.
I do it too. I'm just embarrassed. I never write it down like that, but that is actually how I think. I'm like, this guy.
Yeah.
But I think that if you so long as at the top level you called IPORM, then every time you're in a method inside one of these classes that extends model, you ought have access to the IPORM instance that controls you.
So it dependency injects itself basically.
It like rams itself back into the model, which is a horrible thing to do, but you need it.
It's a nightmare. Okay, so then so I can build that off of the schema string. Like basically inside the thing, I can always call this dot any of my own keys. And like, if that's referring to something else from another model, like that context is injected. It's just, so the thing is like, who's tapping the methods on the object? That's the question that's kind of like, I need to read the code a little bit better to understand, right? If I'm diving through this tree and I'm saying like, okay, now I want to add
the only reason the cohesion of the tree matches is for the particular instance of put and get, where it's hash based putting and getting. That's the only thing that ever really matters for the tree of models,
right?
And it might not seem like that much at first, but the fact that we have these lazy loaded specialty classes like the hash array map try, that's the reason why you need to actually have that put and get be live. It can't just be done and then you no longer care. It needs to be available for the normal operation of the code, because you don't know at any given point what the code is going to ask to be hydrated that wasn't loaded up front.
Right. Yeah. And it strikes me that like whoever is interacting with IPORM is probably like always pulling stuff from IPFS anyway. Like there's no, like, I guess if you want to wrap up all of the new like de novo creation of data inside of methods on nodes on the tree of objects here, like it's fine for IPORM to inject itself then. But I was just kind of thinking of this other use case where I'm passing like a plain old JavaScript object in to some method on IPORM, and it's like creating a whole tree of models for me.
Yeah, that's totally fine. That's absolutely and totally fine. And in fact, I do that in several places in the existing prototype.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that, because whoever has that object also has the IPORM context. And if you have hold of one of the IPORM classes, it's already wrapped in an IPORM context anyway. So if you've got a handle on one of the classes, then you can put in a Pojo, and that class already has an IPORM context to know where to get the other classes it needs from.
Right. But your main use case that you think of when you think of the objects that you're like fetching and pushing back into IPFS is calling methods on the models in order to do things to them.
I want to primarily query their data and
Yeah.
also calculate new versions of themselves and others.
Right.
That's I basically encapsulated all of the logic of the engine into these models now.
Right.
I moved it away from I previously had a strong separation between the functions that would create new instances of this data and put it in and smushed it into the classes. I found it actually much more simpler, much simpler to think about.
This is one of those things that I think is different for every program, right? Because like I've always found it simpler to think of data structures flowing through pipelines.
I know that's where I started, and then I was like, it sort of started to fall apart a bit.
Yeah, it's because you like it once you get to the place where you have like pipelines of pipelines, basically, it gets hard to track. Like you'll always have like a layering effect, right? And like if you don't separate the layers out properly, it gets really confusing really fast.
This in this particular instance, the confusing property was that the data underneath had to have a very strong format, like the block format. But there were many different ways that I wanted to read that data or query that data, and having functions that can perform some logic to simplify what I'm asking, but still use the same shared data structure amongst many different uses. Yeah. That's what having the logic in the same place felt. That's what I got out of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think what we're doing is very object oriented. It's always going to be easier to model in an object oriented way, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. The only thing you want to avoid in object oriented, in my opinion, is like extremely deep inheritance trees, because then you have no idea what you're working with at any given moment in time.
Yeah, I know, particularly with a language where inheritance was sort of retrofitted. So, I mean, in the example we got for I21, class DMZ extends model. I mean, if it's only extending one single base class and it's got one sort of context creating parent, the iPawn.open function, that's pretty tight, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's all good with me.
Sweet.
I think I'm like probably like always. I'm really super obsessed with the first like line of code that instances something on the system without anything existing before that. Like when you're more concerned about the steady state, like downstream operation, which, yeah, I remember having this conversation with you many times. Like, who cares who starts it? Like, just make it work when it's working, right?
And then figure out who started it after. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, so are there any other areas of concern in I21?
No, other than I'm fighting the tooling a little bit too. Wallaby is like always saying something about not being able to do tests on non-module files or something.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay, so what you need to do to fix that one is you need to copy the package.json from Interpulse, where it has a Wallaby section in it. I'll just paste it in this chat to save.
Yeah, I did that actually.
And the thing you need particularly is the -- experimental -VM -modules.
Right.
Because where that's coming from is that Jest uses JavaScript's VM as its isolation mechanism to maintain control over the code that it's running. Inside VMs don't do import. And so you need to turn that on for Wallaby for it to work.
Yeah. I actually copied the bulk of the package.json over for the new package, and it didn't. The Jest test runs, but Wallaby doesn't. And I have this Wallaby config in there, so I'm wondering maybe what version of Sorry.
It's running. I'm running Node latest, so like I think it's 18.7 or something like that. Did you tell Wallaby to auto detect the configuration file from the nearest project?
No, I didn't. Is that a Control Shift P command?
Yeah, Control Shift P and then set configuration. I think it is. Select configuration, and then closest project in monorepo is the one you want.
Okay.
So
Wallaby's gotten a lot more commands since the last time I used it.
yeah, and it's got some cracking features now, like show line timings is just
really?
like the greatest. Like you can just highlight a bunch of lines, go show line timing. It tells you the sum, the average, the lowest, and the highest timing for that particular line, so you can instantly know what's slow. Did you ever play with the step backwards function that they had?
No.
You know how you can in the debugger you can step forwards.
Yeah.
They made it so you can step back.
That's nuts. That's that's the number one thing that I always wanted in a debugger. That's the reason I don't actually usually turn on the debugger, because like that's the only thing that it would give me that's more useful than console logs.
That's what Wallaby has now. So you can step forward, step back into, step back out. You can move time both ways now.
How on earth did they figure that out?
All they're doing is that they're rerunning it up to the step before, and then, but to you, it looks like you went backwards, and who cares, right?
Right.
So,
yeah, I haven't fired up TypeScript in it yet. That's going to take me a couple days of like messing around. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't stress about it either if it's going to make you slow or add confusion.
It's the only thing that adds confusion is I haven't really set up a new JavaScript project since like modules were first class supported. So I'm used to projects that have like build tooling and Babel and whatever else, and like TypeScript's
nice. Dude, like, it's real different. It's nice. It's actually nice.
Yeah. So TypeScript is going to make it a little bit like that's another level of indirection past the module setup too. And so learning two things at once just felt like maybe I should focus on understanding the module stuff first.
Modules took me a long time to understand.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually remarkably simple and neat and clean and incredibly fast. And you can actually handle circular references, and it's beautiful. But it took a while to get my head around it.
Is there any resources you use to do so? Like articles, things you could link me to? Or you just kind of played with it until you understood it?
Yeah, I'll send you this article. This was sort of the penny drop for me when understanding how JavaScript handles how to eliminate circular reference problems by using import export, and it helped me get a good mental model of how the engine was processing the imports.
Okay.
And helped me really understand that the imports are so much higher than they were before. They were basically just on par with user code before. Imports are all processed before any user code whatsoever now, and
Right.
it's one level higher, which is where it should be, where it absolutely should be.
I mean, of course, right? Like doing modules at runtime, like no wonder it was confusing.
Yeah. And so I this helped me understand what was going on under the hood, really.
Appreciate it. I'm gonna push it to myself to read. Yeah, that's it. We can talk about your.
All right, sweet. Okay, so I made. Did you get a chance to read through the document I created called Interpulse Protocol?
No.
Okay, I'll send you a link to it. The Interpulse Announce Protocol. Link in your chat now.
Okay.
Could I just give you a few minutes to skim that?
Yep. Never has a reason to ask for remote pulses.
Yeah, that's interesting, right?
Like meaning, like obviously when you have to get them somehow, right?
You never.
You never have to ask.
As the engine, you never really need to ask for the latest of something. You ought to already have it in order for your processing to be deterministic. Like
Right.
latest is a mutable thing, and so asking for it during the engine run is a big no-no.
Right. So it's an extension of the fact that like you can't know what the latest is across the whole network, basically.
It's opinionated. It's
Yeah.
subjective. Yeah.
Right. You need
Where-
to build. It needs to be agnostic to what the latest is when you actually do a run to create.
We need to run. Well, it needs to be consistent, and that was the purpose of the app route. So any run is relative to a given app route, whereby you know that the tree defined by that route is going to be the same no matter who runs it.
Interpulses cannot be subscribed to.
This an interpulse, you can't. Part of this protocol is that if you had a large object, let's say 20,000 child chains,
Mhm.
one of those chains may receive an interpulse from its parent. You cannot handle that number of subscriptions and not fall over.
Right.
And so one of the principles I adopted was that if a chain does a transmission,
Mhm.
it is the responsibility of the creating validator or network of validators that they need to put in the energy to push that out to the recipient. They need to seek out the recipient and push it to them. That's when their job's done. Otherwise, you can't be sitting around waiting. You could have like millions of connections if
Right.
you don't pass that principle down.
Yeah, that makes sense. So announcing an interpulse is different than subscribing to an interpulse. Like announce means like indicate that it's changed.
announces like, hey, this interpulse was made and you need to know about this because you're a validator of the recipient chain and I'm trying to tell you to do some work.
Right.
But announcing that there's a new pulse is something that is done exclusively by UIs or things looking at the engine, not the engine itself, not the validator itself. It's in this specific instance, what's going to happen is the client's going to load its engine, and then it's going to subscribe to the main application app root.
Right.
Because it wants to know when the application tree has changed and it wasn't done by it.
Right.
And so that's the subscribe, because it is not a validator running that app complex. It is independent and it needs to know when the app root changed so that it can then begin the process of pulling down blocks that it needs to show the new application state to the user.
Right.
And maybe this is, I'm just calling this out because it's a block of work that needs doing at some point.
Yeah.
But I have in mind to build a set of UI widgets that are basically the same as a standard React library, except they have the ability to have subtle cues as to the state being either speculatively executed or, is in sync with the app root, or your change has not yet left this machine. So being able to have a set of UI tools that graciously communicates that to the users is allows us to make it more natural to work in an offline manner.
Yeah.
Like, because for example, like for this app with the trucking thing, I should be able to go out in a truck, lose network, operate on the app complex, make a whole bunch of changes arbitrarily across the app, and then as soon as I come back in network range, my UI should have shown me, hey, look, I'm taking note of all these things you did, but bear in mind that they haven't been approved by the main cluster yet. As soon as I get to network, it'll synchronize that all up, and then there'll be some mechanism of showing me conflicts or letting me troubleshoot what didn't quite work out, that type of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So your client here, like, does it have a validator?
Yes, the browser runs as a validator,
right?
But it is not part of the app complex validator set.
Right. It's like an optimistic validator, like it can act on behalf of the app complex, but you're.
Yeah, sorry, I think I see what you're saying. I haven't decided how that type of work should go right now. If you want to make some changes to the app complex, you need to wait for the app complex to accept each change in turn, which is how a traditional cloud app runs in a lot of ways. That ability to effectively make a change be a fork of the app complex and then you run them on your side. I suspect that that's very straightforward to do. There's no big driver to do that right now. I can get away with deferring it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So like for now, you're basically just write only with no update of the UI so that's the mechanism you want to do. Like to make it happen is I fork the app and I make myself the sole validator of it. And then I optimistically run everything. And then
and then I effectively pull request against the app complex.
Right.
And I specify some relaxation of the hard constraints around it, because I'm like, I only care about the state changes. I don't care if there were some other things that happened in between. I maybe do care if there was a race condition. So let me know if there's a race condition, or depending on my use case, I might say don't care about race conditions, latest wins, just whatever. So I don't think it's terribly hard. I just haven't got around to it.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think it's probably harder than you think.
Yeah.
I don't like forking seems easy to me. Merging is the thing that seems hard.
I should reword that. The concept seems simple.
Yeah.
And it also seems like an extraordinarily useful paradigm to be building in.
I mean, I think just to deliver to people in general, like Git pretty much changed like development completely, right?
No one in their right mind would not use the Git branching model now.
Yeah.
But there was a time when it was considered lunacy.
Right. It's just push your stuff up with FTP. And I think that's a good metaphor to draw, is like that's still how people are running apps right now, right?
Yeah, and it's bad. It's real bad. It's like even a good app is just some version of subversion.
Right.
But those are awful things. This is much more native. So I'll keep thinking about how to do that in an easy way, but I kind of just basically the UI needs to signal to the user what status their changes are in and what status the connection with the main app complex is.
Yeah. Okay. No gossip. How do you figure that?
Well,
I looked back on your document.
Gossip is a privacy concern, because by lifting one level up out of IPFS and into raw libp2p protocols, we can actually start to take control of the permissioning problem now. And gossip is one of the big leaks of that, because things to gossip would be, hey, this node knows about this chain ID.
Right.
If this chain ID is the latest project planning app complex for the Ukrainian army, I might not want anyone to know that I am active in that chain. So gossip is a privacy leak.
Yeah, I see. I also think that, how do you have healing split net without gossip?
You need to know someone, and naive gossip is a privacy concern. Privacy managed gossip, where you're like, hey, can you tell me who's got this chain? And the challenge is, are you allowed to see that chain? And you're like, yeah, here, look, I proved it. And then the other chain is like, okay, here's some peers for you.
Right. So it's like pull gossip instead of push gossip.
Yeah, because when you're in one big permission group, you can do push.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you want any kind of permissioning, that's sort of why libp2p and IPFS's model, they made some fundamental choices, like that push gossip choice,
mm-hmm.
that makes it really against the grain to do privacy.
Right.
A pull-based model can still have one global permission set, but it is more work up front. But a push-based model can never really have the privacy thing. Right.
So it does sort of suggest that there needs to be like some entity that is always like available to everyone.
No, so even in IPFS, in every peer-to-peer protocol like Napster and BitTorrent and all that, you need to bootstrap from somewhere. And so even with like trackerless torrents, you need to have a couple of bootstrap addresses that you can sort of boost off.
Right.
Or else you're never going to get started. I mean, you could scan the IPv4 subnet space looking for peers. You'd find them, but everything has a bootstrap set. Yeah. Additionally, you can persist your previous known discovery results. so that next time you restart, you have something to go off, which is kind of the crux of the problem with libp2p, is that they made some choices between storage and rediscovery. And part of that problem, what is the motivation for me doing this protocol, is that, for example, their DHT implementation, when you want to write a value to the DHT,
yeah,
it won't write it unless there's some peers that you're connected to.
right.
And now my expectation of DHT is like, I'm going to write it. I want my local node to store it, and I want my local node to keep trying to push it out to as many nodes as possible until I feel safe that it has been entered into the global DHT.
Right.
That's not how libp2p actually works under the hood. Same with their pub/sub implementation. It requires, it doesn't have a worker. It doesn't keep trying.
Right. It assumes that the thing is there to receive it, or else it doesn't even try to send it.
Or you missed out, right? And now in the case of announcing the latest pulse, if you connected to the pub/sub swarm 1 millisecond after the latest pulse, you might be waiting years until the next one comes.
Right. So it needs to be pull-based anyway, for like just for liveness sake.
Well, that's where the DHT is pull-based. But the trouble again with the DHT is like it doesn't there's no worker. It won't keep trying. If you like just got your broadcast off and then you got blown up, anyone who receives it does not try to pass that on for you. It's just, it doesn't know, the recipient doesn't know that it's the only one that just got this very valuable message. It's just like, meh. And then when it loses power and comes back, it's gone. Right. So, that's a fundamental difference in how they have designed DHTs and pub/sub in IPFS and libp2p that doesn't really work for us.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it would be easy to put the permission model on top of it all.
No, it just started to feel like it was more and more going against the grain. Whereas the permissioning model, under principle number, principle 3, a node having only one crypto key, that is very much in line with what we wanted. So the node's ID key that libp2p uses is the same as the validated key. That saves a lot of time because that model perfectly aligns with what they're trying to do and what we're trying to do. But I guess my question is like, I mean, I was very reluctant to have to make a new protocol, but I became convinced that DHT and pub/sub were not the thing for us. And later, when we want to do permissioning, they are definitely not the thing for us. And they have some incredible delays in them. And one of the expected ways to operate them is to actually start the DHT and then wait for 100 milliseconds for the code to, I don't even know what. I mean, there's an issue in the repo about it where everyone's like, well, what are you doing? And why is it a timer? But it won't work if you don't wait. And I'm like, I don't like that straight away. And second of all, like, how do I know that I waited long enough?
Yeah, that's brittle as shit for sure.
Yeah. And then there's that problem that if you're not connected to any other peers, the DHT didn't work. So now I was like, well, I'm going to have to start building my own worker that has some persistence and stores it and then restarts when the node restarts. And after all that, I was like, I should just write my own protocol.
Yeah. Is it going to be like a small delta from their DHT or?
it started to feel a lot like a DHT, but the fact that it's so far working on a complete network, whereas a DHT is designed to operate in a partial network. I'm just trying to push as much of the feature set out into the extension realm as I can. Like,
Right.
I just want barely enough to work for this local app running in a secure network, and that's all. Whereas, like, the DHT is actually global, so it immediately causes a problem for the CRM, because this trucking company does not want to. It really has no place being connected to the global DHT.
Yeah.
And I spoke to the IT guys that run the place. I was like, can you firewall out IPFS traffic so that I don't accidentally, and so there's, it just, I hate that I have to do this thing, but I just can't think of a better way. And I was wondering, I guess I wanted to check that I hadn't tried to do too much and that it was actually necessary to do this, and if it made sense.
I mean, if you ask me, like, the network protocol is the most important thing in the system, basically, right? Like, the right version of it is going to correctly capture the idea that the balance, I guess, between, like, the idea that replicating something is the only way to make it stay alive, but that, like, over replicating something is like a massive privacy problem.
Yeah.
But you're saying, like, the philosophical boundary between network and storage, like, I think one of the things that the entire compute paradigm that we work in right now has wrong is they don't think from a systems theory angle very much. Like, they don't think, like, it's just like it's stored there or it's not, and that's always a very local view. And, like, the network is just responsible for like moving stuff around. Like, that feels way too, like, uncoupled, basically, right? There's this, like, if you're not replicating it, like, it's not going to continue to survive, basically.
Yeah.
In the long run. Like, this is kind of the stock and trade of, like, big tech organizations, is making sure that they're swapping hard drives out in RAID arrays, like, under the hood, behind the scenes, like, that you can't see, so that they can continue to have all the information. Like, I think it makes sense that you would end up having to write a protocol for this, but I'm just worried that it like, how does it slot into libp, or, like, into libp2p? Do they have, like, is it modular?
It makes heavy. They have still provided a nice interface that saves a remarkable amount of time. So, for example, the connection encryption is all handled by them. The ability to plug in this protocol into libp2p, dead simple. You're like, set handler and dial protocol are the only two things you need. They handle things like, are you using WebSockets or TCP or UDP or QUIC? They handle all that. And it's just, they get us to the point where I can know for sure that two nodes are talking this protocol that I've written. libp2p handles all the stuff below. Right. And I think that's the area, that's the handoff that they wanted. Them getting into DHTs and pub subs was, I feel like it was actually a bit beyond their purview, because It starts to require local persistence coupled with a worker that does tasks and continually re-ups the DHT and rebroadcasts the pub sub, and it's sort of, I think they wanted off at that point. They didn't want to be that.
Yeah, but you need to build enough to exercise your own code, right? Like, they need to give an example version of, like, what would slot into the space that's left by their interface.
Yeah, and they do allow you to write your own DHTs and put them in there and plug them in there. I guess I just I lament that they hadn't solved ideal DHT already.
Is there like prior art of a DHT that works the way that you're talking about? I mean, I assume they basically just copied Kademlia or something.
Yeah, I know. Well, they implemented Kademlia, but even then, it's this notion of working that
Right.
maybe is an idealistic assumption of mine that doesn't actually exist in a lot of DHTs. I'm like, that's what I expected of a DHT, is that something's gonna keep trying on my behalf as long as there's electricity.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that's just our system. I don't know. But
it doesn't. If they're not doing that, it doesn't seem like they've gone far enough.
That was my thought, right? But I mean, like we actually do a lot of that here, and I guess the balancing act for me is that writing this protocol has danced dangerously close to the void of trying to write a DHT implementation, which I do not want to do because those are hard, and so there's sort of this sway between like when is it one of these Web3 style protocols, and when is it just enough for us? You know, because we have things going on inside our computational layer that represent some of the functions of a DHT and a pub sub, like discovery. Like if you get a pulse, you have a validator set in there.
Yeah.
That validator set represents the node keys.
Yeah.
You can then go and set those node keys and make connections to them to thicken the announce protocol web. You know, like there's a lot of things inside our pulses that can be used to serve functions that IPFS does in other ways.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
The question is, where is the line between when is the operation of the protocol outside of Pulseland and when is it beneficial to be inside of Pulseland?
I think like you should implement as much of it in the pulse as possible, right? Like there's something that has to be outside of it, because like you can't just assume that because I've written these things in this pulse, they're going to eventually reach people. Like there's some code that needs to exist outside of it. I think the way you should answer that question is just like always ask, is there anything else that can go into the pulse? Is there anything else that can go into the pulse? You know?
Well, there is, and what I'm thinking of putting into the pulse is what libp2p calls multi-addresses, right. Which is, so they've got this node key, but they also have this concept of, well, you need multi-addresses, which is like the IP address, the protocol, and the node key all at once tell you how to dial it,
right?
Tell you how to connect to it. Now, it actually doesn't seem in libp2p, if you give it a database instance, it will store all the multi-addresses from all the nodes that it ever interacts with. We could put those into the pulses because, you know, once they're hashed, they take up 32 bytes, and, you know, whoever wants them can go dig them out, and, you know, maybe that's useful. It's also useful to be able to see what the other nodes can see of you. Right. Like what I think my IP address is different to what someone else thinks it is. So, you know, there's a lot of the internal bookkeeping of libp2p that might be better served being in a pulse because it's more shareable.
Right. I guess you probably want to, like, with the MVP philosophy, like, figure out what's the minimum you need to move the pulse around and, like, start porting stuff over later. But
the minimum I need is what I've laid out here, which is I'll bootstrap by saying what the IP address of the server is, and then that's good enough to work, because it's there's also like a 1 second delay in using the pub sub and DHT to broadcast out a latest block, whereas in this system it's like, you know, 2 milliseconds, so that's better. immediately.
Yeah,
I was just worried about this protocol because I'm like, is it adding something in there is going to just be completely binned later as we need to like achieve these other features, or is it just enough to grow into something more? Yeah, I'm feeling a lot more stable about it. Since I messaged you several days ago, I was like, oh shit, this is not good.
No, I mean, you don't want to end up accidentally having to rewrite libp2p, right?
Or the internet.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, it was really doing my head in how to do an implementation for the last like week, but I got that, and I got a basic sort of set of tests going that actually achieve enough of the extensions for me to feel comfortable that this is the right direction, and it definitely achieves what we need for the minimum release. It's just I've carved some architectural boundaries here. Like this whole network is only about latest, and the querying is never ever done using a protocol. It's done using actual pulses.
Right. That makes sense to me. Like, why would you care about anything other than latest on the net? Like, the network needs to be like really, really dumb, right? Like, it needs to be
it should not be smart, man.
You need pulses and you need interpulses, right?
Yeah.
And like those need to be like when I'm just kind of casting about for them, like why would I want anything that's not the latest one?
Well, when you're writing your app, you want to know previous ones so that you can show the user version history. But if you sorry,
when you're writing your app, like you're inside the chain, right? Like you can do lookups based on things that are inside the pulse.
Yes. And to fetch, if you have latest, then you can fetch by hash everything prior. And I guess that's really the thing I'm trying to leverage here, is that the network is, as you were saying, it's only about latest. If you have latest, you can go back arbitrarily.
Right.
So, so don't do that in a protocol. Do that using, so that's done using BitSwap. BitSwap is a great protocol. It's like they used DHT and PubSub to get the hash that you needed, and then BitSwap is what goes out and negotiate. BitSwap is like BitTorrent, but for once you know the content and you know some peers and you've got connections to them, BitSwap does the rest. That part has been brilliant. That was a great job on their behalf.
Is that one going to be hard to make private?
Privatized? Yeah, maybe. But then, if your encryption layer comes on, it might not matter. And then, we can reverse in, we can delve into how it works. I poked at the code.
Yeah.
It's really just this module that they call the decision engine that needs to be privacy aware.
Right.
And so, because the reason why gossip's evil is that BitSwap tells its peers what it wants, but then it also tells its peers what its peers wants. So it kind of does a form of relaying for you, and that's where that bit needs to be privacy aware. Yeah.
So, like, if you were only to feed it like peers for any given chain or like domain or app or whatever that are like relevant to that app, like if you assume that the other piece is doing the discovery and I'm just doing the like data marshalling, then you have a form of security by obscurity there. Like you'd have to guess.
BitSwap never knows about anyone else, and that's why it never leaks privacy. That's what you're implying there.
But it's just if like it sounds like it only does what you tell it to do, right? It doesn't go out there and try and like poke around.
It's also quite open. Like if it receives a connection from someone and someone's like, "Hey, BitSwap," and it'll just give you whatever you ask, so long as you know what the hash is.
Right.
So, I mean, there's some security in that. How would you know what the hash was in the first place? And then if there's also encryption, it's like, well, you need to know the hash, and then you need the key. And then, it gets harder and harder. But ultimately, BitSwap should be privacy aware, where it should look into the content it's being asked for to determine whether the requester is valid.
Right. So that's the piece that needs to actually inspect the pulse. And
Yeah, that's the pulse inspector. Yeah, that part.
okay.
So that's a pretty heavy job.
Well, then it actually, like, it stands to reason that, like, if so BitSwap is like one layer down from whatever the discovery systems are, basically.
Yeah, BitSwap requires a discovery mechanism. It does not supply it itself.
Yeah, I mean, it stands to reason if you were to put the privacy awareness, like the actual pulse inspection there, like, you'd have a lot more flexibility in how you could implement the discovery system, because, like, you could do the discovery system wrong and then have the layer below it stop you.
Yeah, it's good to have a double layer approach there. Yeah. The announce protocol can definitely do discovery by reading the pulses as well.
Oh, that sounds gnarly. I wouldn't, like, how many things are going to read the pulse?
Well, BitSwap is reading it pessimistically, and announce is reading it optimistically. So because their goals are different, like announce is reading it to desperately try find some other people, whereas BitSwap is reading it in a guarded sense to decide whether it's going to respond to a request or not.
Right. I mean,
so announce is like the Silver Surfer, and BitSwap's like
eating the planets.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I get it. The more things there are that, like, I guess reading pulses is a little bit different than, like, acting on them. Anything that's acting on a pulse should, like, be doing it in chain land, basically.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I guess what it's doing, if the announce is reading the pulses to discover more peers, it's acting like a side effect.
Yeah. But I don't know if you want to get tangled up in that mess, like, for an early implementation, right? Like, I think we know enough about side effects now that we can move them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's best to understand, like, what you're trying to build before you build it in a weird way that, like.
Yeah.
I would like to see both of these pieces basically turn into side effects somehow, because it means more stuff is in chain land, right? But I don't. There's something in the network that I don't think can ever be a side effect.
Yeah, that's right. And we've sort of danced around where that ring is. There is always something that must be traditional code.
Right.
But I think that we've got an operating system that has that demarcation between those two worlds at the moment. It's just that no man's land is large. And I think that we can judiciously make little incursions into no man's land, like BitSwap being able to read the pulse and say no.
Yeah.
Like announce reading in to find more peers. Pulse app complexes also storing IP address data. I think we don't necessarily have to draw that line in high precision. We can just eat at it.
Right. I don't know if I agree with IP addresses being in the pulse.
Yeah? Well, why not?
Because they're like, they churn, right? Like, they are, like, less a pure fact and more like what I need at this moment in order to. I don't know. I mean, I guess I think of things in chain land as being, like, more factual, less like.
IP addresses are long running.
Yeah.
and they are useful,
Mhm.
and they can represent a snapshot in time that can be updated arbitrarily many times by inserting new data and rehashing it.
And you need to put it somewhere, right? Because like things are going to
Yeah.
move around in IP space.
I think it's a good thing to model a node as a chain, and part of that model is what its IP address information is.
Yeah. One thing I always think is like, how do you make the end state of all of this like remove you from IP world completely?
I don't think you ever can. You need to bridge gracefully to it. So, like having a network slice within each. So you've got an app complex.
Mhm.
You've got a user directory. Inside the user directory is each person's external link to their shell chain,
Mhm.
but you may also store things like their IP address information as well. And so the other nodes can grab that and read from it if they want.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you like stick to a kind of a paradigm in the chain code of this is a hint, like this is not, a core, this is something I can use, not necessarily something I have to have, basically.
Well, it's like some of these are assertions, and you cannot reach consensus on them because that's just. I mean, we're building cooperative systems. You got to start with uncooperative ones, and someone's like, I assert that I am this. You're like, okay, I can't disagree with it. I don't like it matters not what I think about that assertion. Let's just
Right.
run with it.
Is there, so there's, if I understand what you're saying, right, there's space in the pulse that like you don't need to have consensus on?
Well, yeah, like the validators that run the shell in the browser are single validator chains.
Oh, I see. So it's about picking the right chain to put it in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
okay, I get you now. Sorry, I
Yeah,
was like, something felt really wrong. Like
yeah,
the
it doesn't need,
validators are the
yeah, it's
validators like that are like
not.
big networks of validators won't need IP addresses inside of them.
No, yeah, absolutely. But like a validator will be interested in maintaining reputation
Mhm.
and keeping scoring and all that. And so, along with that, having its discoverability information available, particularly available over time, with things like incentives for checking other validators and being like, yes, I connected on this address. So, correct. Those types of things are important for the long-term network.
Right. Yeah, I guess there's no way of not having any actual routing information in the chain for big networks too. Is there like
Yeah,
you?
and
It's,
I don't think that's bad. I think it's good because it means that a browser, for example, could store a whole lot of internal discovery information for some servers that have had an XSplit, and they kind of don't care where they get that information from, and they can quickly check a whole bunch of hints, and it's very helpful stuff to have in this dispersed, wildly replicated way.
hmm. All right, I think I've pushed us pretty far afield here. The implementation section on this document. So what is the interface you're working to in libp2p?
The interface I'm working to is there's a way to insert your own protocol. I can actually show you the exact lines now.
Yeah.
Because I have committed that code. Hang on a second. There's a link in your chat box now.
Okay.
So the first function is called get peer listener.
Yeah.
That basically just listens into libp2p because it will periodically broadcast when it has discovered a new peer.
Yep.
If I receive information that there's a new peer, I will check to see if that's a useful peer. If it is, I will try to open a protocol connection using the Pulse protocol version 0.0.1.
Right.
On the receiving side, the function on line 58, get handler, that gets connected up in line 21. I tell libp2p that I want to handle Pulse protocol requests using this handler.
Uh-huh.
It's really nice, right? Like it's like the way they've done this is really nice. And so whenever I call dial, which is down at line 202, in line 210, I will tell libp2p that I want to dial the Pulse protocol and I want to dial this particular peer ID. I need to have already told libp2p what my multi-address information is for that peer ID.
Mm-hmm.
Provided I've done that, it will initiate the connection, it will encrypt it using the noise protocol, and it will helpfully, if I've provided like a WebSocket, TCP, and UDP connection, it will try all of them and then give me back the first one that succeeded and negotiated correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, it does all the stuff under the hood, and then I know that my handler function is connected to my dialer function at the end of it all.
Something you said about gossip here is like, does this run in a browser?
Yeah, man.
Like your multi-address, like if you don't have gossip, like can you actually get through to somebody that's not routable with an IP address like a browser?
Browser. So the connections that are formed are automatically full duplex.
Okay.
So when the browser has to dial the server, but
Right.
once it's done that, then the protocol doesn't distinguish.
Right. So the server rebroadcasts to the browser.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no. After that connection is established, the server can push to the browser down that connection,
right,
as well as the browser being able to push to the server.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
It's really nice how libp2p's done it. When they get if you dial or if you receive, you get the same thing, which is a full duplex async iterable pair of streams, and then you can push and pull on the sync and source of those iterables. It doesn't matter at that point. Like it doesn't matter who started it. The connection looks the same on both sides.
So it's like a bus almost, basically. Like just publish stuff to the bus and it's there for everybody.
Yeah. It's I'm so grateful to these guys. Like they save so much time.
You were saying async generators, and there they are. I don't know why people don't like using them.
Remember how much like shit I put us through at Interbit over trying to make the TCP protocol behave like just a wait. I want to wait for the next packet and then do something.
Yeah,
that's async iterators.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
I think the world hasn't caught up, basically, right? I mean, I don't know. It's okay. I'm gonna read this code like closely. Then this is running and tested.
Sort of. It's working in a crude sense, in a synthetic environment. So my current work is on getting it integrated with the engine so that I can connect to engines using this. At the moment, I'm only connecting to synthetic. And that, like, I just mocked up some announcements and some recipients, and today and tomorrow I'll be working on putting an actual engine in there and getting those working together, and then I'm done.
Yeah.
Well, it's I mean, like, that's remote announce. That's the top of the mountain right there. That's as high as we need to go. Like, it's all downhill from there.
Yeah. I mean, downhill meaning the part where you have to chase out all the bugs, but
yeah, but that's I mean, like, figuring out what bug to make is much harder than what bug to solve.
For sure.
At least I know what I want the code to do on the way down the mountain. On the way up, I'm like, I don't even know if this is the right mountain that I'm on. Like, it might.
So how are you planning on hooking this to the engine?
In the file interpulse.js, I don't know if you have that, but basically Interpulse wraps the engine, and it's, at the moment, I have managed to abstract out the concept of the PulseNet, which is all of the networking functions. And so in W300-Interpulse, that is where the PulseNet instance is created, depending on whether you're a browser server, blah, blah, blah. And that is where the announcer goes.
This is the announce function you're referencing in the documentation that you sent me.
Yeah. And the announcer acts like one of two external stimuli to the engine. You can either pierce the engine, that will kick it and cause it to turn over until exhaustion, or the announcer can be told remotely of some new event that's occurred, like an interpulse, and then that will kick the engine as well.
So down where you've written publish basically is what's going to get replaced. Actions.publish equals
no.
No,
that is publish is when you want to publish a new application.
Oh, I see. Yeesh.
So basically this file interpulse takes the shell.js user covenant, and then all the actions that shell.js has, it then puts it on its own prototype chain. So it is a very crude form of an ORM where it's taken the actions from a user covenant and displayed them to the developer on an object where you can call each one. And under the hood, you can see that code that says map shell.
Yeah.
Map shell takes the covenant actions and then wraps them in a dispatch call so that you look and feel like you're actually calling a function. Really, you're dispatching an action into the engine, which then proceeds to do your bidding throughout the system. But the other place where Interpulse wraps the engine is in this networking stack. So the persistence is provided here, the networking is provided here, and the announcement protocol is turned on and listened to, which can cause your engine to cycle if someone you're subscribed to gives you some information that you should act upon. So basically, I think it's it'll be like line 72, await pulsenet.create.
Oh, I see.
that's inside there is where I'll be replacing line 81, hints.create. Hints will be replaced with announce.
Right.
Because that's how announce should be treated. It's a hint that there's something out there that you should deal with. And then you need to dig into it more to find out if it's actually real. And if it is real, then you kick the engine.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. Sorry, go ahead.
One of the key, I don't know if it's a shortcut or an optimization in the protocol, is that because it's always about latest, if you missed something or if an announcement hasn't been transmitted yet, everything always gets dumped and it's only the most recent thing that gets sent to you, which means that when you receive a hint, like a new interpulse or something, you may have to walk back and discover the previous announcements that you would have missed, because the engine requires interpulses to be consecutive.
Mm-hmm.
Hints does not. Announce protocol does not. The announce protocol requires that they be monotonic but not consecutive. The consecutive part is what the worker, which I probably won't implement until, I don't know, much later, the worker fills in, does the catch up. So actually, I get, now that I think about it, there's probably a bit of a vulnerability in this protocol at the moment. I will probably need to implement catch up sooner rather than later, because any kind of loss of network will mean that catch up doesn't occur. So I probably want to have that feature in there. But as I mentioned, it's not done using the protocol, it's done using BitSwap.
Right. Yeah,
which is really clean compared to all the other methods that we experimented with on how to do catch up. Like,
yeah, I mean, like, it makes a lot of sense. It's like, don't like, why would some, you're the only one that knows what you don't know, basically. Why would you assume something else is out there figuring out what you're missing and trying to send it to you?
Right. It also allows the other side to optimize what it can tell you to be just only the most highest value information.
Right.
Well, so by making catch up be part of the expected part of behavior, I feel like that's a stronger system rather than treating catch up like an exception.
Yeah, that's the right way to put it, for sure.
And one of the keys to that, I think, was actually ditching the concept of block height altogether and just having that lineage tree, because Git has no concept of like commit number. They just have relative commit number, not absolute ones.
Right. Is there anything, like, is there any way to declare when I'm calling into the system that the thing I'm doing right now depends on the state that I'm seeing? Like, that's something that we used block height for in the past, was like to indicate at like anytime, because
actually, so that I'm not implementing that now for the CRM, but that to replace that functionality, you simply state the hash of what you saw.
Right.
But it even less. It doesn't even matter so much now, because the model you guys were using there was that actions were transmitted remotely to a validator and then processed, which meant that order and delays really mattered. Whereas here, there's no such problem, because your actions go straight into your local chain.
Right.
Then that chain interpulses to the other side, and that takes care of the order problem for you completely.
Right.
So that's why that matters less. If you want to achieve the same thing as I want to only update at a specific, I think it's like an update condition in a database is the equivalent of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as something that's probably going to be really important when you go to start merging chains together. Like if you do a fork and merge model for optimistic calculation,
So basically stating your preferences for like how do you want to deal with things that changed since you read them in between when you wrote to them.
Just being very explicit about your dependencies of the things that you're adding into the system is going to make it easier for auto merging to happen. Because then you can just cut away and say if I always declare my dependencies basically for every action, then it's very easy to see that I could just stick this beside all the other ones that aren't interfering with the same thing that I'm depending on.
Yep. So there's some hints of that in the use state model that I raised that issue about, which is where you can sort of lock or not lock.
Right. I guess that's what locking is. Locking is saying I'm depending on this part of the state.
Yeah, but there's a simpler way to do it that's like it's like exception based locking, or I wouldn't say optimistic locking. It's just saying that, look, go and update this thing. I expect it to be this value. If it's not, don't do the update, but tell me about it.
Right.
So you sort of, providing some assertions with your right.
Right.
But we should be able to construct those systems given that we can write the reducers that receive them. So making a system level reducer that like interprets some code as like, hey, this is an action with an assertion. Here's the assertions I want to run.
Yeah, I mean, anything that can cause it to bail, like with more fine-grained information, when you're merging, is going to be super high value, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, like, we can also not merge as well. Whereas in a database, because you only have one canonical record, you must merge or you must fail. But we have Git, so we can actually preserve both views and be like, this is the state of the system, right? It's forked, and here you are. What do you want to do? Right.
Yeah.
Whereas, whereas traditional databases, you either get dumped out on your ass or, it goes ahead. But we can just leave it in that state, and you can take your sweet time. And then so as things progress, things might happen in the future that mean that actually it's no longer a conflict, and the merge can just automatically come in.
Right. So, which I guess would probably be the way you would want it to happen most of the time, is like make you fix your more local copy, I guess, right? Like you move it closer to something that's like able to be merged with the main branch.
Yeah, that's right. And then that UI library I was talking about would just color code, a color for conflicted. And then you look at it and you should be able to pull in an extra tool that shows you the difference and all that. And you're like, because, difference to master is the same as difference to history. So if you give easy tools for showing version history, it's the same going across as it is going back.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
So it's, I think that it can be quite straightforward, provided you sort of keep an open mind, as long as we keep an open mind about the fact that we can actually present a different paradigm, which is like Git-based apps. And there is some expansion of complexity for sure, but it can solve a lot of problems to say, look, actually the app's in 5 different states right now. Don't panic. That's normal.
Yeah, it'd be worse if it wasn't. It just means that you haven't checked in with everybody that you're doing the thing with that the app is trying to capture.
Yeah, you're right. And it gives you so much more freedom, because it's like, well, do we always need to be in lockstep?
Well, no, and that's the thing that's killing everyone right now, right? Is somebody needs to sit there being like, no, I'm in charge. I'll tell you what reality is.
Yeah, right. And particularly for a lot of things, man, it doesn't matter. Like a CRM, it's like I have a conflict where like I spelt a name differently. How hard is that to fix, right? It doesn't. It's not these problems that requirement is stopping you from being able to take your work off grid, spend a weekend tidying up all the customer records, and then come back. It's just not worth it. Like,
It's much worse than that, right? Like that conflict is the reason why there's some like tech billionaire sitting between you and your data.
yeah, right. And it's like, what if I'm okay with that conflict?
Right. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. Interesting. I've got 5 more minutes here.
Okay, sweet. I'm done. I just going through that list with you, I actually feel reassured that this was in the right path. Yeah.
If it's that easy to hook like extra stuff into libp2p, I don't think you need to be that worried about it.
Right.
I think especially because there's already the separation there between like the discovery part and the actual just boring like send stuff across the wire part.
Yeah. So that's okay. That's good then. That's the path forwards. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything else that you wanted to cover here at all, or?
No, dude. That was it. I swear this is the last. I honestly think this is the last problem because I'm like, that's the thing we've been trying to do all this time, right? Is have this remote announce thing. Here it is. And yeah, thank you. I feel a lot more comfortable about having our own protocols purpose built for us. Doesn't feel like a waste of time now that I go through all the extra requirements that we'd try to shoehorn someone else's protocol into doing for us. It's actually
it's baffling to me that they don't have anything there retrying sending stuff out to a DHT. Like
I know. That was my thoughts exactly. And then I'm like, I guess that's not how everyone's thinking about DHTs. They're not. Yeah. So I was thinking, I sketched out a diagram for using Interpulse as a pay for DHT service, where you can actually pay a small fee, where you could pay it by keeping your small DHT entries for other people around. That's how you can pay your way, or you can purchase as a service. This global high frequency DHT, which is different to Filecoin, because Filecoin's about large chunks of data, but DHTs are like mutable, small amounts, widely distributed. Yeah. Anyway, sometimes.
I mean, but like, I guess how the payment would work would be like an interesting question to me, because like, would you want it to be in-band payments like you've got planned out for the rest of Dreamcatcher, or would this just be like I think it's a much more tangible problem than building ideas.
Like something more tangible to pay for.
Yeah, like providing some extra service as like a helper on this network to make sure it stays running.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're doing that as like the first host of, we'll offer the service to run people's apps, including run them for free.
Mm-hmm.
Where like paying apps pay for the resources to run the free ones, which help grow the network, which help increase the customers for the paying ones, that kind of model. So we will definitely have that. Providing a commercial DHT version, I think is neat. I mean, I certainly would have loved. I'd just use it right now if we had it. But yeah. No. Anyway, there's lots of cool stuff we can build. We just got to get this first app in and up, and then I think we'll be off.
Yeah, I just hope I can keep up.
I think you're doing just fine, man. I wouldn't worry about it. I just hope I'm not too old by the time we're launched to,
No.
still be able to answer questions when people ask.
I've been thinking a lot about something that you said a couple calls back. Just that, like, if you look at the state of all of it right now, it's such a disgusting mess that's like just entrenching the world's problems more and more. Like it feels like morally important to me to like participate on a project like this.
We can get out of the hole, but we first gotta paint the hole and see it for what it is. And systems like this, preferably this system itself, will paint those holes for us, and then we can do something about it.
Yeah, it's just like power to the people kind of thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a hippie. I think it's really surprising to me that there's like not any tech out there that's about like organic grassroots behavior. Everything is about like wholesale mass data theft, basically.
Yeah, and it's I don't even know how to describe it anymore, but it just feels like trying to kill all the differences of the world and handle everyone's problem with this one massive machine that only a small handful of people control, and we should be grateful. And then, the only way to stop that, the game plan right now is people trying to make a different big machine. And then I don't think, I'm like, well, why don't we just not have the big machine? I mean,
well, it's because the little machines were always too hard to run, right? Like this is all the Web 3, Web 5. Sorry?
I think they were always too hard to coordinate.
Yeah. All this Web 3, Web 5, Web whatever conversation, it's like, I think Web 1 was the right one. Like Web 1 already did a great job. It's just a pain in the balls to run your own server.
Yeah.
Like that's the only thing that needs to be fixed from the model. Like the free internet stuff, right? It's like,
man, as soon as we get, have you heard of Project Xanadu?
No.
It's the longest running vaporware project in the world. And it started as soon as Rev 1 came up. And the guy that runs it lives in Australia. And as soon as we get our version of this thing running, I'm going to go see that guy, because I think we actually hit the majority of Project Xanadu's goals, which was basically this massive web of self-publishing, self-hosting, forking stuff. But yeah, like, I think we hit that. There's we are Web 1. Maybe we should name ourselves as that, Web 1 Plus or something. Like, it's like we're not actually trying to be Web N. We're like, it was right first time. It just needed some tweaks. Here you go. And the tweak, I think, is that instead of communicating between servers, we can transmit the whole server. That's right. Sort of it's like we're not moving, the servers are not static. We move the whole server. That's the difference, I think.
And there's the other one too, the interpulse thing, kind of like, it's like, instead of perceiving the network as this like thing on the outside that's just nuking me with bullshit all the time, it's like the actual meaningful part of the network is on the inside now, right? And the outside network part, like, go ahead, nuke away, right? But like, I assume there's like a lot of hostile bullshit out there, but the actual like meaningful, important part is kind of in band, and like that's the communication between me and somebody else about the actual thing that we want to do.
Right. It expects there to be just this immense ocean of noise all the time, and yet it still operates clearly and concisely on top of it rather than getting drowned by it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, I better jump off.
Cool, man. Thank you very much for your time. I'll stay in touch about the development of the protocol. It should be a couple of days and it'll be implemented in the engine, I expect.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
All right.
Sometimes. Okay.
Have a good one, man.
See ya.